Welcome to the Spirituality What? Podcast, where we explore the mysteries, joys, and challenges of being spiritual beings navigating our unpredictable human experience we call life here on planet Earth. I'm your friendly guide, Rebecca, ready to jump into our adventure of the day. Welcome to Wednesday on the Spirituality What? Podcast. We are here today for part 2 of our psychedelics and spirituality discussion with Andrew. Part 1 was released last week, so if you're just joining us today, definitely start with that episode. It'll provide a little bit more context for today. So today we are going to get back into a little bit more and finish up the discussion of staying present during your psychedelic experience. We're going to talk about some details of psychedelic retreats. That's not really something that I've done before, and so we asked Andrew a little bit about his experience with that. A little bit about entheogens versus empathogens, Prop 122 in Colorado, and then the differences between inward journeys or deep dives as part of psychedelic experiences versus journeying with others around. And we really get into details of spirit and consciousness and talking a lot about fear and releasing fear and what that looks like in our human experience. Let's jump into it. And that happens when you're on psychedelics because of that part of your brain. Like that part of your brain not only is the controller and the ego, but also is planning all of these other things.
100%. And so being aware of those forces within one's consciousness in and outside of a psychedelic experience is what really puts somebody oriented on the path that we're all on, but makes them realize, oh, I'm on the path. Oh, and I'm walking forward. Oh, now I'm making progress. This is the difference between the adept or the person that realizes that they are on a spiritual path. Absolutely. From those that don't. We're all on it, right, regardless, but some realize it and some don't. But when you get serious about that and you understand what's going on in your own consciousness and why you've come here to figure everything out, then when things come up, rather than being strictly reactive and just blaming and shaming and pointing everything at everyone else, we are much more introspective and going, oh wow, I had not a great reaction to that. I wonder what my expectation was that led me to that. I wonder how I got myself into that emotional reaction, because it is always a reflection of our own attachments and expectations that cause those emotional reactions.
Absolutely. So interesting. So I'm going to come back. You talked about at the beginning a retreat that you went to. I've never done a psychedelic type retreat, so I'm intrigued. What is that experience like? What are some expectations people could have going into something like that? Are there expectations people could have?
Well,
they're all different. Of course, they're all different. It's different for every person. So we will caveat saying that.
For one, is that every journey is different. And even every journey for every journeyer, it tends to be different.
In every location.
Right. But beyond that, a retreat, when I refer to a retreat, I'm typically referring to something that lasts at least several days and that the participants are there in an overnight capacity and within the care and oversight of facilitators, usually multiple, and there might be staff that's there to manage cooking and cleaning and all of that as well. And there's integration happening daily. Sometimes a retreat might be specific to a single medicine or plant medicine, like psilocybin. The one that I went to, the first night was psilocybin. The second night was what we call an empathogen. So in psychedelic circles, psilocybin and LSD are known as entheogens, which is sort of that which invites you to see or encounter God. And then empathogens, which are things that allow you to connect to other people. So MDMA would be a synthetic version of an empathogen, and it is sort of a synthetic version of MDA, which is made from the plant called sassafras. And so those have very similar effects. Sassafras lasts longer, quite a bit than MDMA. But otherwise, they're both empathogens and allow for connectivity amongst people. And the retreat that I went to, that was very beneficial because I hadn't had a lot of out and about connections with people. I'd had a very,
especially of that caliber.
Yeah, I'd had a very insular sort of marriage and life, and not much of a social experience at all, and an outward connection. So that retreat to me, while the psychedelics were impactful and even very impactful, the connectivity to everyone was still what I carried out of there. And I just went, wow, this is much more in line with the kind of experience that I want in life than what I've been having so far.
Absolutely.
And then the third night in that case was cannabis. And so the people that
interesting.
so the people that hosted that particular retreat put those in that order for particular reasons, and you can imagine them in different orders, and there's no right or wrong necessarily. And different people at different retreats will use different medicines. So there's one that I worked as a facilitator a few months ago where it was bufo, which is 5-MeO-DMT, then psilocybin, and then MDMA. Okay. So it just depends on the host, the person or people putting on the retreat, and kind of
the
how
goals.
And what the goals are, etc. And then of course there are experiences on psychedelics that are much more narrow. So you might go for a single medicine, single session facilitation of psilocybin, for example, and then that's not going to last several days. Though in my experience, it's common to go overnight at least. So we'll start a journey regularly around 6 or so. Somebody's basically done at midnight, and we encourage them, if they don't want to take an Uber home, we encourage them to just stay in their nest and really just continue gliding down and sleeping. Exactly. And then the next morning we can start with a little integration before they kind of head off.
So these non-retreat, potentially like singular sessions, it makes me think of, although I will have to say that I am not familiar with. So psilocybin is legal for medical purposes, I believe, or we can study, or for studies here, specifically in Colorado.
Yeah.
Is that more of that case? Treatment?
It's my understanding from a conversation that I had with the attorney who wrote much or most of that bill of Proposition 122 said that for most intents and purposes, it was legal day one for how most of us tend to use it. Where regulations are coming in are for people that do want to build retreat centers where there's actual facilities and so forth, and there's going to be probably regulations that are going to come around that. But for people sharing mushrooms, not selling, but sharing mushrooms, or one person sitting for another, all of that was legal right out of the gate.
Very cool. It's such a cool time.
It is very
right
cool.
now in the world for that.
Yeah.
So with your experiences, with the process that goes with psychedelics and specifically kind of like mushrooms, like what is the unique thing about mushrooms?
It depends on how it's done, first of all. So
absolutely. Yes, we should definitely talk about, what is that, set and setting? Please, yes, let's talk about that.
So there are I kind of break psilocybin journeys up into one of two kinds. One that is very specifically architected to be an inward journey.
Okay.
So we call this a deep dive. This is the protocol that Johns Hopkins has been using for years on their clinical trials with cancer patients and other terminally ill patients. And a deep dive is, again, it's about 5 to 6 hours. After you drop in, after you take the mushroom, you have blindfold, you have eye mask on, and you have noise-canceling headphones with a curated playlist that goes the entire time. This is an inward journey. You are certainly allowed and invited to come out to go to the bathroom or have your drink of water, or even if you need to chat, or if you want somebody to take some notes for you on something that you're encountering, all that, totally fine. Though you will be invited to go back in, and people are counseled very directly before their session that this is the point of this particular type of journey, is that you want to be in and fully inward to the greatest extent possible for as much of the whole time
Absolutely.
as you can.
Okay.
And that is what I recommend people do before they do any other kind of mushroom journey, because you want to find out what your experience on a mushroom is going to be before you do that in a setting that may be more interactive, or there may be other people involved
in other places.
Might be lower doses in those cases where you can function a little bit more that way. But you still want to know what your relationship with a medicine is. And this is your experience to have the most purely inward and most clarifying and connected experience that you can have, because every single thing that you experience outside of the music, which is just the music, is all coming from your own consciousness. And it's all your higher self giving you the journey and giving you the information and the experience and knowledge that you need. And so that's why I recommend people, and for anyone that does want to participate in more of a group or interactive session, which we also do, I'll require that they've done a deep dive at least once before they do that. And as long as they've done that, either with me or with anyone else, then it's like, great, then you're certainly welcome. But then you kind of know what your baseline is, you know, sort of how you are.
You have some expectations. Yeah,
yes, which we want people to temper expectations as much as possible.
But if you're a total basket case,
you want that level of comfort that's like, oh, I've done this before, and I know what that experience was like, and I kind of know how I am, quote unquote, exactly. And then you can feel really comfortable in more of a group setting where there could be anywhere from 3 or 4 to, I mean, we've had as many as maybe 10 or 12 present in a big group kind of journey that's, again, more interactive. And the doses are a little bit lower there so that people
facilitate kind of interaction and connection. And so we talked about energy a little bit earlier, and now we're talking about doing psychedelics with other people around. What is, it's obviously a different experience if you're doing this internal deep dive and all of your senses, you are just looking at yourself internally. When you have other people around, how does that change the experience in your experience?
Well, it creates, there's always a collective consciousness. So in any room, in any place, and in fact, even built around logical concepts, there's a collective consciousness. There's a collective consciousness around the idea of a coffee mug and what it is, and what it, how it performs, and exactly
what it looks like,
what's it for, exactly what it looks like, and how comfortable it is, and all of that. So collective consciousness is almost like a special interest group, and whatever the common denominator is of any particular group, be that humanity, for example, or the people who are in this room right now, a collective consciousness is sort of formed and anchored to the extent that that's where your awareness is sort of structured around. So as we have a more interactive experience, we will find a common ground, and it really has a lot to do with who's present and how they're showing up. What are they curious about? What are we collectively wanting to know? Because in these interactive sessions, that's typically how this goes. These are people that are seeking truth and light, and just you just show up sort of earnestly, just going, I just want to understand that much more. I just want to get that much closer to whatever my spiritual evolution ultimately is going to look like. And so when you have people that are asking questions, that's everything, because I've been super blessed to have people in a lot of these groups that are just starving for knowledge and understanding, and that need to know is what's building this collective vortex in the center
sort of opens
this room. Exactly. And so then we start to form this this circumspective understanding of whatever it is that we're trying to understand at a greater level. And so we're all contributing to this, and this is creating this sort of spinning vortex kind of motion. And so the need to know is what's pulling it down the most, and all of our collective awareness and energizing of the question itself is what's really adding to the spin. And then the truth and the light just come through, and people just start going, oh man, it's like this. Oh wow, I totally get it. Like, it just becomes real, and we begin embodying these things that we're trying to understand.
It's true. It's a very interesting experience to have that connection with the universe or source or whatever it is during those moments, and just know things. it's such an interesting feeling.
Yeah. To talk about archetypal energies normally are sort of out of reach and kind of just something that we kind of understand at an intellectual level. And then on Psychedelic Journey, when that aspect of us that's normally hijacking the whole ship is kind of taking a nap, now all of a sudden we can just dip in and out of these different experiences and different energies, and like, oh, it's kind of like, the creative energies of positive and negative and divine masculine and feminine kind of, feel like this, and it seems like this, and this is where it comes from, the infinite pool of potentiality, just whatever. It's like you begin to just understand the way that things work. And that, again, when we get back to integration, is so key, because if this doesn't impact how we make choices, if it doesn't change our experience in life, if it doesn't lead to way less stress and a lot more joy, then we might as well be at the gym, or we might as well, like, honestly, there's all of those things that we can do to kind of keep our egos busy and have our ego going, moving. Yeah, you're doing the work, and it's like, maybe I'm power walking, or maybe I'm learning to golf, or whatever it is. But if we're not actually having a new experience in life and choosing differently and reacting differently to what's present, then we're just playing the small game still.
Yeah. So you've mentioned quite a few times consciousness. So what is the difference between spirit and consciousness in your mind?
That's a good question. So first of all, I consider consciousness to be a fundamental principle as opposed to an emergent one. And that's, I think, most people that are on a spiritual path are going to find themselves there, though it's important to understand the difference, because science and physics and physicists, as we know them, tend to think of consciousness as an emergent thing, that it's like it just came about because of all the right, things fell into just the right place, as opposed to seeing consciousness as the causal force behind all of physical manifestation. Now, when I refer to spirit, so consciousness might be an amalgamation of your mental acuity and your spiritual awareness and identity and even your body, because you've got mental and emotional bodies that are part of your consciousness as well. So consciousness is sort of the energy kind of holding it all together. When I refer to spirit more specifically, this would be the highest light, the most pure thing with which you could identify. So if you were to strip away everything that's transient, so everything that exists only in 3 and 4D, everything that only exists in the span of a single incarnation, then strip away everything that even exists from one incarnation to the next, the soul bodies and so forth, the spirit, otherwise known as the monad or the divine spark, this aspect of the creator that is you, that's your identity. So the rest of all that is what you are. This is who you are.
I like that. Man, I love talking to you. It's always,
must be why we do it. So
it's always so fun and enlightening. Yeah, so I'm thinking now a little bit more about, I just love the visual I have in my head of this part of my brain going quiet. And it's a very interesting experience when it happens, because I agree with you. Everything that you've said has been really great. And the experience, in my experience with psychedelics, I've just never been more present. And in most cases, I don't even have the mental capacity to plan and start thinking about things. I mean, every once in a while I'll be like, I want to try to take a picture of something, and then I can't function with my phone anyway, so it's like, fuck that, like that's not gonna work anyway. It's just way too much.
Had a lot of run-ins with the phone trying, hey, can we put on a different music or something?
And then it's like, nope, no, we can't.
I'm an IT guy in my normal life, and here I am just looking at this.
Exactly. I'm like, everything's touchscreen, like it should be super easy. But I think it's a very interesting opportunity, psychedelics in general. And I talk a little bit about, in my first episode, I think I was talking a little bit about the difference between religion and spirituality, and just the big difference there. Religion is very like structured spirituality,
dogmatic,
basically.
Doctrine.
Exactly. But could be
spiritual for some people who
100%.
identify with that, and you don't need religion to be spiritual, which is all.
100%. Religion is a spiritual path. I mean,
exactly. And in my opinion, and I talk about it as like an opportunity. You know, if you want to try to figure out what spirituality means to you, going to a random church and saying, does this vibe with me, and deciding yes or no, right? Another opportunity or another path is psychedelics.
100%. Yeah, all choices are valid, as I like to say.
Absolutely.
And all experience is valid. And again, the adept, the alchemist, the person who has decided that they now know why they incarnated, and they now understand the rules of engagement, and they understand how things generally work. Now they're starting to use everything in their favor and for their benefit, and so that they can, through intention and through the exercise of will, bring into manifestation the kind of experiences that they want. And a psychedelic will allow someone to start to experience that aspect of self that we were talking about, that I would describe as the true self. And it's important because even if somebody has some deep yearning, and frankly everyone does, there is no one that does not have that aspect of self that seeks expression. It is seeking to be made manifest and to be made known, but to the extent that it's kept in the background by the egoic personality structure, then it's just sort of in the background. This experience is what starts to teach the ego, which needs to know that as we step out of one boat of identity, we are putting our foot squarely into another one. And that while there's an aspect of the ego that's afraid of annihilation, we can give it the compassion to know that really, as a personality structure, it's really just being assumed. It's just being integrated and braided.
It's still part of it.
With divine will. It's just we're no longer identifying as it. Well, it's really important because you have to release the fear of annihilation before you can really embrace this other identity and to go, well, what's on the other side of this? And I had somebody ask me recently, I was reading a book about this and saying, well, the ego is described as this insane roommate, and so, what's supposed to happen on the other side of this? Like, am I just going to evict this thing? And until you start to have an answer to that question of who am I if I am not this, then it does feel a little bit scary, and it feels more awkward than it does once you finally realize, oh, this is who I am.
Just because it's unknown.
Yeah, just because it's unknown.
It's the unknown, right? And we're never like 100% confident with the unknown as human beings in general.
And starting to embrace what we can know and what we can align to, knowing the self as the true self, as the moment, as Christ consciousness in manifestation. Like, that is the highest alignment that we can hold. That's the highest level of attainment in consciousness that we can have in physical form. And being aligned to that is what allows the will, the egoic will, the personality will, and divine will to be combined and braided together, so that that which is a tool and is useful for 3D, 4D communication and interaction takes its rightful place as tool, as personality structure. So it doesn't mean that if you're funny, that you're no longer funny. You're still funny. You still use humor in the ways that you use humor. There's a really beautiful way that I've heard this described, and that's that your true self is you without fear. And
oh my God, I love that.
and in this context,
that
and in all
so
contexts,
true.
Fear is the denial of the divine. Fear is anything that you have decided is outside of source or God or whatever, the all that is, so whatever limiting. You want to call it. Exactly. And so when you decide that something is outside of that light, then that is fear. And so your true self knows itself as one with all things. It knows that all things are one with all things, and so it has no fear. There is no fear. So it doesn't mean that it's not funny or that it doesn't use personality to navigate a world filled with other people. It just means that it's not afraid.
That's really, I love that. I'm really attached to that right now. But I also think it's interesting because when you talk about the change between an internal experience, which is very intense in my experience as well with psychedelics, but also one where you have this group of people in the experiences that I've had with other people, they're like the nicest people ever.
Oh,
like everyone is, there's no fear. So everyone's just so nice.
It is very nice. And I would say that
kind, so kind.
I think that the spectrum is available. I'll say that a deep inward dive is the most likely to produce an experience of ego dissolution, and
Absolutely.
therefore experience of the self as true
Connection.
self. Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
Connection to source. When we lower the dose and introduce other people, it depends on the person.
Totally.
And their experience, both with psychedelics and in consciousness. Some of us are able to pretty easily navigate into that same spot. We kind of hang up, that aspect of self as we drop in. We know what's happening. We go, okay, this is going to go there, and now this is going to come forward, and then that's what happens. And if people have a little bit less experience, or they're still a little bit more reliant on the egoic structure in their day-to-day, it might just be a little bit more present, but not in a bad way.
No,
I mean, they're still very much open and dialoguing. I mean, it's still very, very beautiful.
Yeah.
It's just, to what degree are we able to transcend that thing that sort of hijacks our identity and know ourselves in truth? That's sort of the only kind of, spectrum. But how it expresses in the understanding of love and interaction and all of that tend to have much more to do with that collective consciousness that we were talking about before.
Very cool. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. I wanted to thank you so much for joining. And I guess, is there any kind of final thoughts that you wanted to say to anybody before we?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it has been my pleasure. And secondly, when I talk about an adept or the alchemist and so forth, that's anyone that decides that they're going to start to create their own reality. And really, that starts to realize that they've always been creating their own reality. So it just means sort of waking up. And a big hallmark of that, a bellwether of that, is the seeing of opportunity, of catalyst in our experience as the opportunity that it is. And it's very important because that's what changes our experience. We no longer have these really negative emotional reactions to things. We catch ourselves much sooner and go, oh, wait a minute, why am I doing this? And so it's got a very, very, very practical application that everyone can benefit from. And so it's not just about what our long-term goals and alignment are for our spiritual evolution, but really how we can change and improve day-to-day life right now.
Totally. And I really just go back to, and part of the tagline for this podcast is spiritual beings with the human experience. And this really, I mean, there's science around your physical body changing with these substances that allow for spiritual, for
100%.
more bigger, more in tune spiritual experiences. Not obviously you don't have to have psychedelics to have a spiritual experience.
But like you said, to integrate it into the human experience, because a lot of times people will abandon their humanity to go pursue their spirituality and their connection to source, which might be very fruitful in some ways, and then in others they may turn around and realize that the bottom half of their energy centers are completely blocked or disconnected because there's no connection to the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, we do live in this world currently. We kind of
chose
to be here in this world currently. So the very last question that I've got for you today is just, what is one tip about living as a spiritual being in this human existence that you want to share with the listeners?
Pay attention to your emotional guidance system. And when you're stressed out or freaked out or whatever, that is when there's a part of you that is really trying to tell you something, and it's not what you think it's trying to tell you.
Yeah. Awesome. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
What a fabulous overall discussion. I am really thrilled that Andrew agreed to join the podcast here in the beginning, and I can't wait to do the rest of this series on DMT and LSD, marijuana, other psychedelics, other hallucinogens that are out there. So it's going to make up a very interesting part of this podcast. And thanks so much for joining. Thank you for joining me on today's Spirituality What? Adventure. Subscribe, rate, review, and share this podcast. Visit us on Instagram at spirituality.what to interact, tell us what spirituality means to you, and even provide some of your own personal musings. Human on, you phenomenal spiritual beings.